Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Hari Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Hari Jaya Gopi Janna Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Janna Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Hari Jaya Radha Madhava Punjabi Hari Iskon Guru Ki Shri Prabhupada Ki Tantra Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Gaur Premanande. So is this non-Vaishnav calendar today? Loading from chapter entitled Further Consideration of Devotional Principles. Smelling the incense and flowers offered to the deity. In the Hari Bhakti Sudodaya, there is a statement about the incense which is offered in the temple. It stinks. When the devotees smell the good flavour of the incense which is offered to the deity, they have an allergic reaction. They thus become cured of the poisonous effects of material contamination as much as one becomes cured of a snake bite by smelling the prescribed medicinal herbs. The explanation of this verse is that there is a herb found in the jungles which expert persons know how to use to revive the consciousness of one who is bitten by a snake. Simply by smelling that herb, one becomes immediately relieved of the poisonous effects of the snake bite. The same example is applicable when a person comes to visit the temple and smells the incense offered to the deity. He is cured at that time from all his material contamination. I'd like to make 2 short points on that. One is, when I first went to visit the temple at Chaitanya College, I drove 400 miles to get there. And it was a big stately home, and couldn't tell which was the front door. And the door I went to was like about that wide, that thick, and I was knocking on it thinking nobody would even hear it. It was quite dark at that time of year. Apparently everyone had gone out for the day apart from one devotee who finally opened the door. It was Jananandaraj who opened the door, and it was like the door to the spiritual world opened, because immediately I could smell the incense and the light from the building and the light from Maharaj's effulgent face. It just made me feel like, oh, I've came to the right place here. Another thing also, Kusum Sarovar at Govardhan, the old lady who lives there, we knew her husband as well, Babulal. He was a Brahmin there for many years, serving the deities. And he was also bitten by a snake, and to external vision it looked like he was dead. But they have a snake charming village nearby, so they called somebody to come over, and he chanted some mantras, and he had a peacock feather and waved some herbs about, and he revived consciousness, and the poison came out of his orifices. So it's this is a science that the materialists won't understand. They just think in terms of what their experience is. Okay, so there's more to be read on this. Shri Nectar Devotion Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 7, Chapter 10, entitled Prahlad, the Best Among Exalted Devotees. Start a new chapter. So we'll read the summary and then text one. This chapter describes how the Supreme Personality of Godhead and Sringadev disappeared after pleasing Prahlad Maharaj. It also describes the benediction given by Lord Shiva. Lord Nrsimhadev wanted to bestow benedictions upon Prahlad Maharaj one after another, but Prahlad Maharaj, thinking them impediments on the path of spiritual progress, did not accept any of them. Instead, he fully surrendered at the Lord's lotus feet. He said, if anyone engaged in the devotional service of Lord prays for personal sense gratification, he cannot be called a pure devotee or even a devotee. He may be called only a merchant engaged in the business of give and take. Similarly, a master who wants to please his servant by after taking service from him is also not a real master. Prahlad Maharaj therefore did not ask anything from the Supreme Person of Godhead. Rather, he said that if the Lord wanted to give him benediction, he wanted the Lord to assure him that he would never be induced to take any benedictions for the sake of material desires. That's by benediction. Give me the benediction that I don't want any benediction. Exchanges of devotional service for lusty desires are always very prominent. As soon as lusty desires awaken, one's senses, mind, life, soul, religious principles, patience, intelligence, shyness, beauty, strength, memory, and truthfulness are all vanquished. One can render unalloyed devotional service only when there is no material desires in one's mind. The Supreme Personality of Godhead was greatly pleased with Prahlad Maharaj for his unalloyed devotion, yet the Lord provided him one material benediction, that he would be perfectly happy in this world and live his next life in Vaikuntha. The Lord gave him the benediction that he would be the king of this material world until the end of the Manvantara millennium, and that although in this material world he would have the facility to hear the glories of the Lord and depend fully on the Lord, performing service to him in uncontaminated Bhakti Yoga. The Lord advised Prahlad to perform sacrifices through Bhakti Yoga, for this is the duty of a king. Prahlad Maharaj accepted whatever the Lord had offered him, and he prayed for the Lord to deliver his father. In response to this prayer, the Lord assured him that the family of such a pure devotee as he, not only the devotee's father, but his forefathers for 21 generations are liberated. The Lord also asked Prahlad to perform the ritualistic ceremonies appropriate after his father's death. Then Lord Brahma, who was also present, offered many prayers to the Lord, expressing his obligation to the Lord for having offered benedictions to Prahlad Maharaj. Lord advised Lord Brahma not to offer benedictions to Asuras as he had to Hiranyakashipu, for such benedictions indulged him. Then Lord Nrsimhadev disappeared. On that day, Prahlad Maharaj was installed on the throne of the world by Lord Brahma and Shukracharya. Thus Narada Muni described the character of Prahlad Maharaj for Yudhishthira Maharaj, and he further described the killing of Ravan by Lord Ramachandra and the killing of Shishupal and Dantavakra in Dwapara Yuga. Shishupal, of course, had merged into the existence of the Lord and thus achieved Sayuja Mukti. Narada Muni praised Yudhishthira Maharaj because the Supreme Lord Krishna was the greatest well-wisher and friend of the Pandavas and almost always stayed in their house. Thus the fortune of the Pandavas was greater than that of Prahlad Maharaj. Later Narada Muni described how the demon Mayadanava constructed Tripur for the demons. Who became very powerful and defeated the demigods. Because of this defeat, Lord Rudra Shiva dismantled Tripur. Thus he became famous as Tripurari. For this, Rudra is very much appreciated and worshipped by the demigods. This narration occurs at the end of the chapter. Srinaradhivacha Bhakti Yogasya Tat Sarvam Bhakti Yogasya Tat Sarvam Antaraya Antaraya Tayarbaka Manyamano Rishikesham Smayamana Uvacha Ha Smayamana Uvacha Ha Srinaradhivacha Bhakti Yoga Shatat Sarvam Antaraya Tayarbaka Manyamano Rishikesham Smayamana Uvacha Ha Srinaradhivacha Bhakti Yoga Shatat Sarvam Antaraya Tayarbaka Manyamano Rishikesham Smayamana Uvacha Aha Srinaradhivacha Bhakti Yoga Shatat Sarvam Antaraya Tayarbaka Manyamano Rishikesham Smayamana Uvacha Srinaradhivacha Srinaradhivacha Narada Muni said, Bhakti Yogasya of the principles of devotional service. Tat those blessings or benedictions offered by Lord Nrsingadev. Sarvam, each and every one of them. Antarayayataya, because of being impediments on the path of Bhakti Yoga. Arbaka, Prahlad Maharaj, although only a boy. Anyamana, considering Rishikesham, unto Lord Nrsingadev. Smayamana, smiling. Vacha, said, ha, in the past. Translation. The Saint Narmada continued, although Prahlad Maharaj was only a boy, when he heard the benedictions offered by Lord Nrsingadev, he considered them impediments on the path of devotion service. Thus he smiled very mildly and spoke as follows. Please repeat. The Saint Narada Muni continued, although Prahlad Maharaj was only a boy, when he heard the benedictions offered by Lord Nrsingadev, he considered them impediments on the path of devotional service. Thus he smiled very mildly and spoke as follows. Srila Prabhupada's purport. Material achievements are not the ultimate goal of devotional service. The ultimate goal of devotional service is love of Godhead. Therefore, although Prahlad Maharaj, Dhruva Maharaj, Ambarish Maharaj, Yudhishthira Maharaj, and many devotee kings were materially very opulent, they accepted their material opulence in the service of the Lord, not for their personal sense gratification. Of course, possessing material opulence is always fearful because under the influence of material opulence, one may be misdirected from devotional service. Nonetheless, a pure devotee, Anya Bilasita Sunyam, is never misdirected by material opulence. On the contrary, whatever he possesses, he engages 100% in the service of the Lord. When one is allured by material possessions, they are considered to be given by Maya. But when one uses material possessions fully for service, they are considered God's gifts or facilities offered by Krishna for enhancing one's devotional service. Om Gyanantimanandasya Gyananjanasalakaya Chakshurmatamina Tasmai Shigurave Namaha Tam Karoti Vachalam Pandamalagate Grimnyati Patamam Vande Shigurmhimataranam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Guru Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. The Saint Narad Muni continued, although Prahlad Maharaj was only a boy, when he heard the benedictions offered by Lord Nrsingadev, he considered them impediments on the path of devotional service. Thus he smiled very mildly and spoke as follows. It's interesting there. Prahlad Maharaj is offered these benedictions, and even though he was a small boy, he could understand because of his advanced devotional service. Devotion service doesn't just begin in this one life. It means that from before this, he was already an advanced devotee, because he couldn't be so advanced being a boy of that age. And sometimes, if devotees are falsely renounced, if you offer them sense gratification and they refuse it, they may refuse it with an attitude. But Prahlad Maharaj just smiled, which meant he was neither attached nor averse. So sometimes this is a question, isn't it? That it's seen that aversion can be another side of attachment. They may be averse to using something Krishna's service or doing something Krishna's service. Now, if it can be used in Krishna's service and we're averse to using it, then that would indicate that we have an attachment. And there's no harm in admitting that, because that's why we're in the material world. If we had no attachments, we wouldn't be here. There was one time Harikesh Prabhu gave a class, and he was talking about innocent people in the material world. He said, nobody's innocent. You're in the material world, that means you're guilty. Of course, it doesn't mean to say that the devotee is callous about that, and he certainly isn't. He's a very compassionate soul. But the fact of the matter is, we don't know what our karma is. Even in the Mahabharata, we're hearing that people was getting karmic reactions from many, many births previously. So we don't know what the order of things is. And Krishna explains in Bhagavad Gita, don't try to understand the implications of action and reaction. It's very difficult to understand. So if something happened, you think, oh, maybe that's because I did this the other day. It's like, no, most likely it wasn't that. It's most likely, we haven't got to that. We won't get to that for a long time. But as devotees, then that is cleared up very quickly. In the Nectar of Devotion, it's mentioned that when one dances and sings and claps their hand in front of the deities, then the lines on your palms change. So it's not necessarily you take a photograph of your hand and go, Haribo, Haribo. Okay, compare that to the photograph. It looks the same to me. What it means, it's not literally. We have to be careful not to take things literally. Sometimes it's literal, sometimes it's not. This one wouldn't be, because what it really means is the lines on your hand determine your future, generally, astrologically speaking. But when you come under the shelter of the Supreme Lord, then your future's in His hands. You're no longer in the hands of the material energy. So we have to remain in that shelter. If we try to pretend we're under the shelter but remain under the shelter of material sense gratification, then we're not really under the shelter of the Lord. Just as when Draupadi was being derobed, then she was still holding on to her robes until finally she realized she had no choice but to surrender to Krishna. And then Krishna incarnated as her sari, and no matter how much Dushasan and whoever else was there tried to derobe her, they became exhausted because the sari was limitless. So it's amazing. You couldn't actually make this stuff up. When you read Krishna book and other pastimes, you think, you actually can't make up such stories. It just has to do. It's truth is stranger than fiction, sometimes they say, isn't it? So Prahlad Maharaj, it didn't seem that, at the age of 5-year-old, that he had a lot of time to have performed a lot of austerity or study at that age. So definitely he was taking up from previously. Or if not even taking up, then simply he was there as a pure devotee to fulfill the desires of the Lord. So when the Lord is offering these benedictions, Prahlad Maharaj is smiling. Now we don't know what is behind the smile. Maybe he's thinking, my dear Lord, you know better than that. You're in my heart. You know that I'm not interested in any of these things. But it's interesting that Prahlad Maharaj was smiling. The devotee is known as Abhaya, fearless, like Srila Prabhupada name, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Abhaya Charanaravinam. Fearless because they're representing Krishna, and Krishna cannot be defeated. So when the devotee is stepping out in the name of the Lord and taking shelter in the Lord, then they know that Mari Krishna Rakike, Raki Krishna Marike. If Krishna wants to kill me, who can save me? If Krishna wants to save me, who can kill me? So can anyone think of an example of someone Krishna wanted to kill and no one could save? Anybody? Somebody that Krishna wanted to kill, but no matter what arrangement was made, they couldn't avoid it. Yep, he's a very good example. Kamsa's one who tried so many ways to kill Krishna and to avoid being killed by Krishna. But no matter what he did, if Krishna decides to do it, then it's going to happen. And another one could be Hiranyakashipu as well, couldn't it? He tried so many ways. He had so many benedictions from Lord Brahma. And we're hearing also in this summary of the chapter that Lord Nrsimhadev was advising Lord Brahma, don't give such benedictions to demons in the future. He was somewhat obliged because he'd done the deeds. Hiranyakashipu, he'd done all the pasha, so he was there to collect his wages. And he says, okay, what can I do for you? And Hiranyakashipu says, well, I want to be eternal. Well, I can't give that to you. I'm not able to give that because my lifespan is not eternal. He says, okay. So Hiranyakashipu, thinking he's clever than everybody else. And when you hear about it, you think, well, he's covered all his bases, can't be killed in this way, that way, this place by this thing, etc. So he basically covered all bases there, that there was no way he could be killed. But despite the fact he was thinking that he's immortal, then Lord Nrsimhadev very easily kept all of Lord Brahma's promises intact and still killed him. So this is his supreme intelligence. Nobody can match such intelligence. And the Lord doesn't have to think hard. He already is in full knowledge of everything at all times. And if Krishna wants, he can bend the rules as well to suit. Just like the battlefield at Kurukshetra. So Arjuna's side was taking a bit of a beating because there were very formidable foes on the other side. And Ashwatthama, he was a very, very powerful warrior. And he was wreaking havoc amongst the ranks in the Pandava army. So Krishna said to Yudhishthira, if you shout, Ashwatthama is dead, everyone become disheartened, and then we'll get advantage over them. Now, when Krishna tells you to do something, you don't consider whether it's pious, impious, true or not. You just do it. This is the mood of surrender devotee. But Yudhishthira Maharaj, he was so renowned for being truthful. He was known as Ajata Shatru. He never had any enemies, and he never told a lie. So he couldn't bring himself to tell a lie. And it's mentioned that prior to this, his wheels didn't touch the ground. But when he refused Krishna's order, then his wheels touched the ground. So then he says, well, at least shout, because there was an elephant also called Ashwatthama, which had been killed. He said, at least shout, Ashwatthama the elephant has died. So he said, okay, I can do that. So he said, so at the point where he said the elephant, Krishna blew his conch, so all they had was Ashwatthama, boop, is dead. So in this way, Krishna is never frustrated in his purpose. So we have our eternal nature. Lord Chaitanya explains in his Chaitanya Charitamrita, Jivera Swarupahoy Krishnera Nityadas Krishnera Tatasta Shakti Beda Beda Prakash. So Sanatana Goswami asks Lord Chaitanya, Kene Imaya Jari Tapatroya Hanajani Ke Mani Hitahoy. Who am I? Why am I suffering the threefold miseries, and how can I be benefited? So, and Lord Chaitanya said, First of all, who am I? It's Jivera Swarupahoy. You're eternal servant of Krishna. Krishnera Nityadas. Krishnera Tatasta Shakti. So you're Tatasta Shakti, which means marginal potency. So we're neither the internal potency nor the external potency, but marginal potency. And Srila Prabhupada explains that this means that the living entity who is Tatasta Shakti, they come under the influence of either Maya or Krishna, depending on how they use their free will. So when we use our free will in Krishna's service, then that is the proper swarup. As Prabhupada explains in the purport to the Mahamantra, that it's an incompatible situation for the living entity to be in the material world. We're trying to enjoy inferior energy known as Maya, and we are part of the superior energy, Paraprakriti. So this creates an incompatible situation that we are living entities and we're looking for some taste, but the taste we get is not the higher taste, it's a lower taste. Just like we have this book, The Higher Taste. This is coming from this verse, Param Drisva Nivartate. Krishna is encouraging us to get a higher taste and give up the taste of the material world. And so Srila Prabhupada explains that we have this second nature in the material world to try to enjoy the senses as second nature. We have a condition, but actually second nature is the correct description because we have a first nature, which we've forgotten about. As Srila Prabhupada explains in his Vyasa Puja offering to his spiritual master, forgotten Krishna we fallen souls, pay most heavily illusions tolls, darkness around all untrace, the only hope is divine grace. And Srila Prabhupada refers to this Nityabada concept, that living entity is eternally conditioned. So he explains in one purport in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, because a living entity has been in the material world for such a long time, due to time immemorial, then it seems like eternity. But he says when the living entity is liberated from this Nityabada situation, they'll realize they were actually never conditioned. They simply were temporarily covered. So even if living entities in the material world for a million Divya Yugas, right? A Divya Yuga is what? Or a Maha Yuga? So have a guess. So you get Kali Yuga, Dwapar, Treta, Satya, a Divya Yuga or a Maha Yuga is all those combined. That makes like one full Yuga. So just like within the year we have different seasons allocated certain times, then but they're all part of the 1 year. So these 4 cycles are part of a Divya Yuga. So even if you're alive for a million or a billion Divya Yugas in conceivable time, according to our experience just now, we might live 70, 80 years. That's kind of possible. Might not even get that far. But in comparison to that, then thinking of a million years, what to speak of a million Divya Yugas. But in comparison to eternity, that any length of time in the material world is like a flash, because the soul is actually eternal by nature. And Prabhupada further goes to state that because we think in terms of yesterday, today, and tomorrow, then we lose our sense of eternality. But when we engage in devotional service, then we regain that swarup. And I can't remember where in the Bhagavatam, but Maharaj Yudhishthira asked Krishna, how is it that living entity gave up their service and came to this material world? So he is very clearly saying that the living entity did give up the service. And it's because we have this freedom of will, then we can try to be lord over the material nature. So everybody in the material world, they're little versions of God's competitor. There was one video used to be quite popular on ISKCON. It was Tamil Krishna Maharaj in Fiji, and the title of the video was called God's Competitor. And it was quite funny actually, because it was a big auditorium and there was a lot of people there. And one person asked, "Have you heard of such and such Baba?" I won't mention his name because it's Bhagavatam class. They don't get the credit of being mentioned in Bhagavatam class. And he says, so Tamil Krishna Maharaj may well have heard this. He says, "Tell me about him. Who is he?" And he says, "Oh, some say he's God." So Tamil Krishna Maharaj played along with it. He says, "Oh, he's God. So how does he manifest his godliness?" "Well, sometimes he'll produce some apples." "How many?" "Maybe half a dozen." "Okay, and how much can you buy them in the marketplace for?" $3 or something like that. And we're talking about Fiji dollars, not American dollars. He says, "What else can he do?" "Some ashes." "Okay, we can get ashes at the crematorium. That doesn't cost it." "And what about something else?" "Gold." "How much gold?" "Such and such." "Okay, so maybe $100 or something worth." He says, "So it's a damn cheap God." He says, "Let him starve, feed the starving multitudes in Africa, and then we'll consider if he's God." But these are just an example of God's competitor. Now, we're all trying to be God in the sense that we're all trying to be the enjoyer. Purusha, where we're all actually Prakriti. People are fighting for women's lib, but the real thing is we're all female. We're all female in the sense that we're all Prakriti, meant for the enjoyment of the Lord, and He's the Purusha. And when we act in that nature, then we're satisfied. If we act according to our nature, then we're satisfied. If we're not acting according to our nature, then we're unsatisfied, dissatisfied. So to some degree, we may be able to act according to our temporary material nature, but ultimately, Prabhupada says we should aim to be equally enthusiastic about any service we're given, because we see it as equal. We see it as being a divine duty has been given to us. And when we see it like that, we can be enthusiastic. We may not be necessarily good at everything we try to do, but this is the thing, we do our service with enthusiasm and detachment. If we're not good at something, it doesn't mean to say that we think, okay, well, I'm not going to make an effort then. That's quite a material conception, isn't it? We should make an effort. And then Prabhupada said that sometimes we don't get to do what we like to do, or we have to do what we don't like to do. But that's the material world as well, isn't it? Even if you go out there and get a job that you like, there'll be aspects of it that you don't like. Maybe the people you don't like. The job's great, the people are terrible. Or the job's good, the people are good, but the boss is a nightmare. Now the job's good, but the wages aren't very good, or I have to travel so far. In the material world, there's always something. There's always yes, but. There's always a but. And that's a Krishna's mercy, because He doesn't allow us to remain satisfied in the material world. This is Krishna's eternal love for the jiva, that He's always ready. Whenever the living entity makes some endeavour to turn back to Him, then the Lord gradually starts to bring him back. And of course, someone who Raki Krishna Marike, if Krishna wants to protect someone, then no one can kill them. So who would that be? Prahlad Maharaj, he's a very good example, yeah. That no matter what Hiranyakashipu tried to do, and he couldn't be killed. And Prahlad Maharaj, he wasn't necessarily chanting so that he could be saved from death. He was just simply chanting in pure devotion. And automatically, the Lord protected him, even physically. I remember one devotee explaining to me that people, there was one occasion actually where Prabhupada says that this eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, of all of these, defending is most difficult to give up. At other times, according to the context, it'd say other things, but defending, because we're defending everything else. We're defending our false ego, our very reason for being in this material world. So when we talk about self-defense, sometimes people learn some martial arts, and some devotees who know martial arts, they think that puts them in the category of being a Kshatriya, which is quite a limited concept of what Kshatriya is. But I remember one devotee explaining to me, we see that in the 5th canto, Jad Bharat, he was captured by these cannibals, and they tried to make an offering to goddess Kali. But because she's also a devotee of Krishna and she recognized Jad Bharat as a devotee of Krishna, then her and her associates came off the altar and they defended Jad Bharat by killing these dacoits, these demons who were going to kill him. So this is an example of the best type of self-defense is that you don't defend yourself, you just depend on Krishna. Like Haridas Thakur, he was born in a Mohammedan family, and because of his chanting, he was taken before the Muslim governor, and he was given a sentence to be whipped in 24 marketplaces or 23 marketplaces, whatever it was. And generally, after a few marketplaces, the person would be dead, maybe not even manage one. But after we've gone through all the marketplaces, then the the Muslim men who were put in charge of administering this punishment to Haridas Thakur simply for chanting, they became very fearful. And Haridas Thakur, being compassionate, said to them, "Why are you so afraid? What's wrong?" And says, "Well, we've been ordered to whip you in so many marketplaces, which means basically we should kill you, but you won't die." And basically he was so humble, he said, "Oh, sorry for such inconvenience, just throw me in the Ganges." And then they were very grateful and threw him in the Ganges. Of course, he came out and he survived it. But it was considered that he wasn't actually experiencing any pain, and he didn't protest. He just accepted it as Lord's mercy. So we have these great examples to learn from. And yesterday we were hearing Prabhupada close to coming to the end of his Leela in this world. Devotees were concerned for Prabhupada, his health, how are you feeling? And he says, "Why are you concerned? I'm not bothered." So Prabhupada was showing that he wasn't feeling inconvenience, he wasn't bothered by it, he was just seeing it for what it is, just observing in full knowledge. So the suffering in the material world is because of our attachment. We have attachment and we suffer loss, and we suffer the fear of loss. Because what is this? We fear to lose this body, don't we? Because it is a facility for us to enjoy. If it's taken away, how are we going to enjoy? But for a devotee, then we utilize whatever's given to us as long as it's there. And if our situation changes, then we'll still continue with that Yukta Vairagya principle of utilizing whatever we have in Krishna's service, whether it's a little or a lot, we'll just use everything Krishna's service. This is mentioned in the purport here. Whatever devotee possesses, he engages 100% in the service of the Lord. So sometimes Krishna won't give material facilities because it might cause the devotee to become too attached. And sometimes he'll give so much facility, but there's still a devotee who's not attached to it because he doesn't see it as his. And this is a great lesson for us. Anyone get any questions or comments? Yes, sir. By using Krishna service. Now, if we're not sure how to do it, we can ask someone to give us direction. And sometimes people come to the temple to give donations because they accept that the devotees will use it in Krishna service. Because they see, particularly the devotees who are temples which are preaching and which are doing nice standard of deity worship, then people are happy to give to that if they have some understanding of the benefits of that. And even Prabhupada said, if you like to eat nice foodstuffs, then just cook nice foodstuff and offer it to Krishna. So even if we are attached, we may be attached to opulence, still just use it in Krishna service. We might not be detached, but we're still using it, we're doing the right thing, and then gradually the internal will match the external. So it's like we're giving up so many things, and sometimes there may be desire still for them, but because we're not doing it, then and we're doing something more spiritual, we're chanting Hare Krishna, especially, we're taking Krishna Prasad, which is purifying us, we're hearing the Shastra, associate with devotees, so many things which are purifying us, then even though externally we're doing one thing and internally there may be something else, in due course that incongruity will level out. But we have to, it won't just happen automatically, we have to make an endeavour, which means when things are difficult we continue serving and we just tolerate and carry on serving the best we can in the circumstances. And sometimes we have some object or some opulence which we're attached to, and we use it in Krishna's service. And then it can come to the point where actually you're not longer any attached to it because the service is a higher principle. I remember we're doing some festival in Hungary, and there was probably 300 or 400 people in the tent at the time. And I was playing guitar, we were doing kirtan, and then there was some kind of power cut. So we switched over to kartals and madanga, and I was just realising, because before we switched over, I was just thinking, we're just jumping up and down in kirtan, whether, it doesn't matter what the instrument is, we're no longer listening to the instrument, we're just getting into the holy name. And the people also were getting that, because when the power cut Zermi switched over to traditional acoustic instruments, then everyone just stayed and continued chanting. They got past the music side of things. So in any case, whether we're attached or unattached, we just use it anyway. And when we're doing things correctly, then we will become unattached. Is that okay? All right. Iskon Guru ki, Sri Prabhupada ki, and Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Tagore Premanande. Go back to the key.